Hello, my name is Ken Bowser. Today I'll make my predictions for the 2024 presidential race. We'll be looking at the natal charts and solar and lunar returns of Joseph Biden and Donald Trump, who I believe will be our nominees. I will also briefly examine the horoscope of the United States and its 2024 solar return, as well as the horoscope of George Washington's first inauguration and its 2024 solar return. Washington's first inauguration is the chart of the office of the presidency itself. I'm a Western sidereal astrologer, so all the charts here will appear in sidereal longitude. I'll also touch upon the US Pluto return, which by sidereal reckoning will occur 3 times in 2024. This transit is connected to tumult and upheaval, which I think will be most extreme during the period of the 2024 presidential election. I like to show as much of my work as I can, so I'll put up the most important charts I use to make the prediction. Also, in addition to aspects in the ecliptic system, with which all astrologers are familiar, I'll take into account aspects in the equatorial system, better known by its coordinates as the right ascension and declination system. These contacts are called aspects in mundo, or mundane aspects. They're formed by 2 or more planets that are simultaneously angular, which may have no standard relationship in celestial longitude, but are nevertheless real contacts with as much power as aspects in ecliptic longitude. President Washington's term began on March 4th, 1789, at midnight local apparent time in New York, when the U.S. government in its present form was invested with legal authority. But the executive branch without a president couldn't do anything that day, nor the judicial branch with no Supreme Court justices appointed, nor the Congress, which convened but adjourned for lack of a quorum. So while Washington's term began in March, his powers were conferred when he took the oath of office on April 30th, 1789, at approximately 12:45 p.m. local apparent time at Federal Hall in Lower Manhattan, according to the diary of Senator William McClay of Pennsylvania, who was an eyewitness. Local apparent time was the standard in the U.S. and England in 1789. It's essentially the same as sundial time. The local mean time equivalent is 12:41 and 55 seconds p.m. The horoscope for the most powerful executive position in the country, quite appropriately, displayed the sun at 18 degrees 55 minutes Aries, almost exactly in its own exaltation degree, which is 19 Aries 00. In addition, the exalted sun was in an extremely close mundane square with Jupiter, also exalted in Cancer. They're in a close quintile, but the far more powerful contact is in their mundane square. That is to say, if the sun were placed exactly on the eastern horizon, Jupiter would be found almost exactly in the IC, only 17 seconds of sidereal time from simultaneous angularity, which is also the closest aspect in the chart. 17 seconds of time is less than 1/10 of a degree of arc. Sun-Jupiter confers legitimacy, increased status, and overwhelming success due to the sun's exaltation and elevation in this horoscope. In addition, the very powerful alpha star in Leo known as Regulus, also called the Little King, rose at New York only 6 minutes 51 seconds of time before this chart got underway, which is less than 1 3/4 degrees of arc. At that moment, Washington was actually walking toward the entrance to Federal Hall, while young girls dressed in white were literally throwing flowers in his path. Leo rising, in particular its brightest star Regulus, is preeminently a sign that relates to rank, position, and power. This has become the horoscope of the most powerful secular position on the planet. This chart is the 2024 sidereal solar return of Washington's first inauguration. Solar returns are an extraordinary predictive tool. I use the sidereal instead of tropical returns because tropical returns do not take precession into account, which, if ignored, alters the time and even the day of the return. This solar return is obviously a difficult horoscope upon first inspection, because both lights, the sun and the moon, are sorely afflicted, especially the moon. The moon represents the prevailing condition throughout the birthday to birthday year, and three other less ephemeral, classical lunar elements: home, family, and especially one's person. This solar return for the 2024-25 birthday to birthday year features the moon conjoined to Saturn, only a quarter degree from exact. And that conjunction is 6 degrees to the west of the natal Saturn. That frequently dangerous situation, because it's often attended by health problems, is compounded still more by the trine of solar return Saturn to the natal moon, applying from 2.5 degrees out, which underscores the gravity of the moon-Saturn situation. The moon in this return is also semi-squared the solar return Pluto, almost exact to the minute, which suggests a crisis situation for the office holder. The public at large is also symbolized by the moon in mundane astrology. Moon-Saturn is symbolic of very serious, difficult tasks, and often sadness and loss if other factors support that conclusion. The compounding of the moon-Saturn condition suggests a dark cloud will have settled over the presidency during the course of the year. The sun relates to one's deepest, most fundamental nature, the wellspring of motivation and action. Transiting Neptune is semi-square Washington's first inauguration sun in this solar return, which is only 1 minute from the exact to the minute semi-square. Neptune is frequently symbolic of substitute and sometimes clandestine means or forces, which may weaken or compromise whatever they contact. The upside of Neptune is hope, inspiration, a connection to spirit that looks like magic or spirituality, and acts of selfless generosity in an ideal world. The overall tone of a horoscope is necessary to support that result, which is not present here. The conjunction of solar return Neptune to solar return Mars below the horizon suggests domestic terrorism on one hand and actual straight-up fighting on the other, rather than a mere show of force. The reasoning behind that extreme conclusion is twofold. Mars with Neptune as a transiting combination, not necessarily natally, suggests nefarious intent, and the mundane square between solar return Mars and the beta star in Perseus called Algol, only 3 minutes and 11 seconds from exact, which is less than 1 degree of arc, is violent. Algol has a bad reputation. The Chinese called it piled up corpses. In this chart, Mars is in the IC when Algol sets in Mundo. Perhaps more than anything else, the square from solar return Uranus to the natal Pluto in the 4th house, less than a quarter degree beyond exact, powerfully suggests discontinuity and disruption in the office of the presidency. A radical change, because solar return Jupiter is also square the natal Pluto, which increases the scale of the change. Yet Uranus square Pluto is not a garden variety transition, but more like a train wreck. There are many versions of the chart for U.S. independence. The most commonly used chart is the one advanced by Ebenezer Sibley in his A Complete Illustration of the Astrological and Occult Sciences in 2 volumes, in which he gives the birth time for the U.S. as July 4th, 1776, at 10:10 p.m. local apparent time at London, England. The problem with this chart, in fact Sibley's entire complete illustration, is that it's riddled with mistakes of fact, methodology, and arithmetic. The time I use is a slight modification of the time arrived at by the American astrologer John Hazelrig that appeared in his book Metaphysical Astrology in 1900. Hazelrig's time, in turn, is based approximately on an article entitled Our National Anniversary that appeared in the July 1851 edition of Harper's New Monthly Magazine, which commemorated the 75th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I confirmed and slightly adjusted Hazelrig's time via primary directions. These things are laid out in my book, Primary Directions and the Horoscope of the United States. Primary directions are a predictive technique whereby the angles of a horoscope are advanced to the planets in right ascension. The primary directions for 12:01 p.m. local apparent time which is 12:16 p.m. local mean time set up for Philadelphia, are remarkably persuasive and consistently work on time. Much has been made over the last several years of the return of transiting Pluto to its natal place in the horoscope for the Declaration of Independence. Since Pluto's orbital period is 247.686 years, transiting Pluto will not conjoin its natal position until 2024, when it makes 3 exact-to-the-minute contacts with natal Pluto. A tropical ephemeris shows the Pluto return in 2022, which does not conform to Pluto's orbit, and I give it no particular value except that transiting Pluto was within orb of its natal place in 2022, but the exact contacts are strongest. It should come as no surprise, then, that the solar return for the United States in 2024 for the 12:16 p.m. LMT time puts transiting Pluto conjoined to natal Pluto overwhelmingly angular at the top of that return chart. The July 8th day of the return is due to the 3 degrees 27 minutes and 56 seconds of precession that will have accrued in the 248 years between July 1776 and July 2024. That is, the same position in the sky that obtained on July 4th, 1776 will not be reached until July 8th, 2024. That's why tropical reckoning cannot be used for era-to-era comparisons. Contemporary dates that relate to positions in the sky from an earlier era change, rather than the frame of reference. Pluto at the midheaven of the solar return is only part of the transiting Pluto to natal Pluto conjunction in the US solar return for 2024. Mars and Uranus are angular on the ascendant, and they are both closely mundane square natal and solar return Pluto. The combination of Mars, Uranus, and Pluto on superior angles does not suggest a mere disagreement, a simple change or transition. It suggests violence and upheaval. It's conspicuously noteworthy that when the polls close in California on Election Day, November 5th, 2024, at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, transiting Pluto will be at 4 Capricorn, 42 minutes, conjoined to the U.S. natal Pluto at 5 Capricorn, 56 minutes, with transiting Mars in its fall at 5 degrees 34 minutes Cancer, opposing both the U.S. natal Pluto and transiting Pluto. That is a lit fuse, which is hard to imagine as an accident. It's likely that the 2024 election will be attended by organized violence on a national scale because Donald Trump will doubtless claim to have won no matter the result, and may try to disrupt the swift vote tally in states where the count is close or to get mail-in votes discounted. In view of his record of behavior, one must ask how a person like Trump could reach the presidency. The answer is in Trump's horoscope side-by-side comparison with Washington's first inauguration, the chart of the American presidency, which shows that they share the same ascendant. In a strange twist of fate, considering his character, there are several close and important connections between Trump's chart and the chart of the presidency itself, which is usually the case among presidents, in particular between the benefics. For example, Trump's Jupiter is square Washington's inauguration moon, separating by less than a degree. Trump's Venus is applying to the conjunction with Washington's inauguration Jupiter by less than 2/3 of a degree. Both of those are extraordinarily lucky and fairly common among winners who reach the presidency. On the other hand, Washington's inauguration Saturn squares both Trump's sun and moon by less than a degree to the sun and slightly more than a degree to the moon, which, in consideration of his 2 impeachments and myriad charges and indictments of late, clearly demonstrates that he's the bad apple in the barrel among U.S. presidents. Trump's Mars is conjoined to Washington's inauguration ascendant from less than 3.5 degrees out, and Washington's inauguration Mars is only 3/4 of a degree beyond the exact sesquiquadrate to Trump's natal ascendant. That's both dangerous to him personally and suggests that he would damage the office of the presidency. Trump's sun is trine Washington's inauguration Pluto, slightly less than 1 2/3 degrees from exact, and Trump's Pluto is square Washington's inauguration sun, less than 3 degrees from exact. These contacts symbolize a total rejection of what can be expected of a president sworn to uphold the Constitution, because the promitter significator situation is doubled and switched. Perhaps worst of all, Trump's Saturn is square Washington's inauguration Neptune, only a quarter degree beyond exact. That's often a signature of corruption if there's support for the worst, which is the case here. Trump has Saturn square Neptune natally as well by mundane square, only 11 seconds of time from exact. It does not exist as a zodiac square in his chart, but it suggests he would violate and pervert the ethos and function of the office. Among the many charges against him are tax evasion, fraud, rape, and the disclosure of government secrets, including military secrets. His election would be nothing less than giving sanction to a mob boss on a bigger scale than a criminal family organization. Trump's horoscope engages all 4 classical malefics in Washington's first inauguration. Those contacts equate to a rogue president or a tyrant, but the good connections to Washington's inauguration chart, the virtual carbon copy of Washington's inauguration natal angles, and the great power of Regulus got him into office, warts and all. He also had a winning solar return in 2016, as I'll show you later. Now on to President Biden. His horoscope also has the classic connections with Washington's first inauguration, but more of them than Trump and without the baggage. I'll only give the highlights. Here's the side-by-side comparison of Biden's chart with the chart of the presidency. Among the most prominent aspects between them is Biden's Venus trine Washington's inauguration Jupiter from 3.5 degrees out, which is always lucky, and suggests that the country would mostly benefit from his tenure in office. President Biden's Sun is trine Washington's inauguration Jupiter from 2.5 degrees out, perhaps the most important placement because it symbolizes the correct use of power, which is beyond doubt the most important dictum incumbent on those who have it. The closest contact between Mr. Biden's planets and Washington's inauguration planets is the president's natal Jupiter, exalted in Cancer, conjoined to Washington's inauguration Jupiter, also exalted in Cancer, only 5 minutes of arc from exact. This last is the sign of a patriot, pure and simple. With all of this in mind, one must ask, how could Biden lose? He's running against a man who tried to overthrow the government. In a word, health. If the president's health fails, or is even suspect, it's game over, because there is nobody else of sufficient stature and name recognition among the Democrats to stand up to the powerful personality of Donald Trump. There is one worrisome contact between President Biden and the office of the presidency. Mr. Biden's natal Mars, in its detriment, Libra, is directly opposite Washington's exalted inauguration Sun, only 1/4 degree from exact. He appears fragile and frequently mispronounces words as if he were recovering from a stroke. An exalted Sun can incinerate a debilitated planet. Still, the Sun-Mars exchange is certainly symbolic of his willingness to stand up to Vladimir Putin over Ukraine, in stark contrast to Trump, who displayed a non-stop clinic on obsequious behavior toward Putin, who obviously has something on him that would be a deal breaker with the American people, even for Trump. If Biden were incapacitated, or worse, a stampede of new Democratic candidates would vie with Kamala Harris to enter the race for president, making it hard for voters to coalesce around a new candidate. Some of them, even at this date, November 12, 2023, have declared interest, which is always bad for the incumbent. This takes us directly to the 2024 solar return for each candidate. I'll touch upon the most important elements. Biden's next solar return will run from November 21st, 2023 until November 20th, 2024. It's a very difficult chart because both lights are badly afflicted. One does not want to see the solar return moon aspected by more than one malefic during the course of the birthday-to-birthday year. Transiting Saturn or Mars to the moon often signifies ill health. Mr. Biden's sun is conjoined to Mars by less than a degree in his 2023 solar return, far below the horizon in the third house. People often feel attacked or harassed, which is frequently literally true when Mars configures the sun, especially with the conjunction, opposition, and square. Furthermore, the sun below the horizon, tucked away, remote from the angles, is not a strong position from which to wage a campaign. Transiting Neptune will remain angular for the entire year, going back and forth from the 7th house, symbolic of the most significant others in the life, to include enemies, which indicates that he could be betrayed, to the 6th house of the solar return, a place of infirmity. Transiting Neptune will also trine his natal sun throughout the entire year. As a practical matter, Neptune weakens whatever it touches. Worse, transiting Neptune will be sesquiquadrate Mr. Biden's natal Mars all year, which makes everything harder than it otherwise would be. This transit is like being hamstrung, therefore injured and unable to bring one's best to a fight, or like charging into quicksand, unable to maneuver. Transiting Pluto will be square Mr. Biden's natal moon for the entire birthday-to-birthday year. Transiting Pluto to the natal moon brings some measure of crisis into the life that generally relates to one's person, home, or family, and sometimes all three simultaneously. The same Mars that conjoins the Sun in this solar return is closely mundane square the solar return moon, although that's not obvious because they have no zodiac aspect. Solar return Mars rises at the White House when 10 hours, 49 minutes, and 46 seconds of sidereal time is passing through the MC. 1 minute and 14 seconds later, which is slightly more than 1/4 degree of arc, the moon passes through the IC. Mars closely configured with both lights in a solar return is usually a problem for somebody in their 80s. The solar return moon's placement in the 6th house only emphasizes the matter. The solar return moon is square Mr. Biden's natal Saturn, 1 degree, 22 minutes from exact. This is depressing and also relates to being limited or blocked, not infrequently due to physical issues. That is to say, problems from within oneself. It usually represents an uphill battle. Furthermore, solar return Saturn is sextile the natal moon, 1 degree, 21 minutes from exact, which represents problems from without or outside oneself. The moon's Saturn situation is therefore doubled. Chronic illness attends this if either of the moons is in the 6th house, as the solar return moon is here, and either moons suffer additional affliction. The solar return moon is quincunx the president's natal Pluto, 1 degree 21 minutes from exact. Often people feel abandoned with this transit, alone and with few options. Solar return Pluto is sextile Mr. Biden's natal sun, less than 1/2 degree from exact, and will remain within orb of the sextile to the president's natal sun for the entire birthday-to-birthday year. One often feels cut off, estranged, or cut out of the action when this transit is on. The Pluto situation is made still worse by solar return Pluto trine the ascendant of the return itself, less than 3/4 of a degree from exact as this chart begins, but which will also be in play for the entire jurisdiction of the chart, that is to say for a year. Unless simultaneously attended by helpful symbolism, Plutonian symbolism is frequently related to desperately important military, physical, or life and death issues that impose extreme tension upon one's person. In short, his situation is not enviable because the angles of the solar return pick up Neptune and Pluto while Mars, Saturn, and Pluto configure both lights. Now on to Donald Trump. Here's his 2024 sidereal solar return. If this chart were a poker hand, it would be worth a strong bet because Jupiter, Uranus, and Mars are elevated. Mars is dignified in its own sign, and Mercury and Venus in mutual reception straddle the Sun. All of those things confer dynamism, enthusiasm, and good fortune. Washington's first inauguration sun, that is to say the prize he is seeking, is in the midheaven of this chart. Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto are not angular, a noteworthy benefit in itself, but it's conspicuous benefit to have Jupiter, Uranus, and Mars elevated over everything, as long as Mars is not angular. Still, it's a good, but not a great hand. The major problems are similar to President Biden's. Both the natal and solar return moons are seriously afflicted, and there is worrisome, indeed ominous symbolism that becomes distinctly powerful before the winter of 2024-25 begins, and which lasts throughout the winter into the spring of 2025. Solar return Saturn is square the Sun, less than 5 degrees from exact. People often win with this combination anyway, although of course it always depends on what else is in play. Note Ronald Reagan in 1984, with transiting Saturn closely square his natal Sun, and Dwight Eisenhower in 1952, with transiting Saturn and Neptune conjoined his natal Sun both at the time of those respective elections. It does suggest that Mr. Trump is feeling his age, especially due to the tremendous stress of 3 ongoing civil trials and 4 criminal indictments that include 91 felonies, which would be too burdensome for a lesser person to handle and still win. The solar return moon is trine solar return Pluto from 3.5 degrees out, which will be in play for the entire birthday to birthday year. With Pluto in the 6th house in his solar return, which I prefer to see empty, and Saturn square the Sun, a secret health condition will likely bother him throughout the year. Since transiting Pluto is much closer to the opposition to his natal Saturn in right ascension than in longitude, especially across the horizon, he may have trouble with his balance, spatial awareness, and be subject to falls. Solar return Saturn is applying to the square of his natal moon from 3 degrees out, and as transiting Saturn configures both lights in this solar return, he will doubtless make a great effort to avoid giving evidence of his age. He'll be 78 in 2024. He's clearly overweight and pressed relentlessly due to legal issues that have finally caught up to him. People are slowed down by the transit of Saturn square the moon. Medical issues appear. Family problems develop, and one is hard-pressed to keep all the balls in the air. The solar return moon is semi-square natal Pluto from 2 degrees out. This is another reason why he may have reason to be concerned about his health during the year. People feel, and are often literally, singled out with moon to Pluto and vice versa simultaneously. Most fundamentally, it symbolizes unwanted pressure and responsibility that ages people quickly. The far more serious matter is solar return moon opposite solar return Neptune, less than 2 degrees from exact, which will be in play for the entire birthday to birthday year. This aspect is consistently difficult unless one retires to a life of prayer or contemplation in a convent, ashram, or philosophy department at university. For people like Donald Trump, it says a lot about the ever heavier baggage he's been dragging around of late as he lurches from one trial to another. With Neptune, one is often tethered to medically necessary drugs due to chronic problems that control the life. There's an element of dependence about it. The solar return moon is semi-sextile natal Mars, less than 1/3 of a degree from exact. This much neglected old standby is quite potent if it's close, as in this case, because it will then repeat in the harmonic charts. It imposes a load on the body, which is like trying to play tennis in snowshoes with a 60-pound backpack. Solar return Mars is semi-square solar return Saturn, less than 1/4 degree from exact, which is suggestive of violence and that he may instigate it himself, inasmuch as Mars rules the 10th house. In any case, Mars with Saturn, as close as this, is frequently dangerous, both in the sense that it can promote violence as well as symbolize being a victim of it. Solar return Saturn is square natal Uranus, 1/4 degree from exact. This transit limits options, freedom of action, and makes one the subject of somebody else's exercise. One is forced to conform to a schedule, a regimen, or limitations imposed from outside oneself. This is clear from his several trial dates that will occur during the 2024 campaign that require his presence. Solar return Mars is semi-square natal Uranus, only 2 minutes of arc from exact. Note that Mars in this solar return is the midpoint of solar return Saturn and natal Uranus. This can be a trap, sprung by ill-advised actions, or a wire tripped by fate that brings down the native by the most unlikely source. One's body fails at the worst moment. Summing up, the double Moon-Pluto situation with Neptune opposite the solar return moon, as well as Saturn and Mars also touching the natal moon, strongly suggests that something is wrong with his body. I think he's suffering from a condition and not merely the cumulative effect of 78 years. Ironically, Biden has the same symbolism. Now let's look at the quarter solar return and lunar return charts to zoom in on the period of the 2024 presidential election. A quarter solar return is a return chart set up for the second and fourth quarters of the birthday to birthday year, when the sun is exactly 90 degrees from its natal place. A lunar return is the return of the transiting moon to its natal place. Its jurisdiction is the mean sidereal month, which is 27 days, 7 hours, 43 minutes, and 12 seconds. They're useful as timing devices. Transits that come to the angles of these charts and angles directed to planets, time events. These charts are set up for the place of residence. But before we do, let's take a quick look at his 2016 solar return when he first won the presidency. The first clue, actually a blinking neon sign that 2016 would be an extraordinary year for Trump, was the conjunction of the solar return moon to the natal Jupiter. It's rare for a solar return with the moon conjoined to natal or solar return Jupiter to work out as anything less than exemplary. This is the return chart closest to the election among the solar charts. In the 2016 quarter solar return, Venus was conjoined to Trump's natal Jupiter, and they both rose together at the PSSR rate at New York on election night, almost exactly as the quarter solar Uranus set. The PSSR is the progressed sidereal solar return. It's actually a direction based on the average daily increase of the MC between two consecutive solar returns set up for the same place. This technique uses the right ascension of the mean sun as argument. Uranus, Jupiter, Venus, all simultaneously angular, is outrageously fortunate. It was this chart, more than any other, in contrast to Hillary Clinton's abysmal returns a week before the election, that allowed me to confidently predict that Trump would win in 2016. Now on to Trump's quarter solar and lunar returns. Trump's quarter solar return for 2024 is eerily similar to 2016. In Trump's 2024 quarter solar return, Venus is again conjoined to his natal Jupiter, and they rise nearly together at Palm Beach, Florida. That Venus is brought to the ascendant by the solar quotidian direction on November 9th, 2024, which suggests the election is not decided until approximately then, or it's a day of celebration. The solar quotidian is a direction based on the actual daily increase of the right ascension of the apparent sun. Trump's lunar return, closest to the election, begins on November 4th, 2024, the day before the election, set up for Palm Beach, Florida, where he's likely to be. This is a powerfully auspicious chart because the transiting Venus-Jupiter opposition is angular, splayed across the horizon, and laid over his natal sun-moon opposition, which renders it far more potent than it would be remote from the horizon. The horizon will not be directed to rising Jupiter and setting Venus until November 8th by the quotidian rate, which is another indication that the election will not be decided for sure on November 5th, or he has a 2-day wingding on the 8th and 9th. Now, Biden's quarter solar and lunar returns. President Biden's quarter solar return, closest to the election, begins on August 21st, 2024. The possibilities in this chart, notably Venus at the IC and Jupiter square the meridian, are severely compromised by angular moon conjoined to Saturn, almost always a serious debility for a candidate, and Mars square the meridian and Neptune in the 10th house. The angular Neptune suggests that Biden and the Democrats are successfully misrepresented and maligned by Republican attacks, since this Neptune is closely semi-square Washington's inauguration sun, and Mr. Biden is the office holder. Generally, one does not see Neptune prominent in a solar or lunar return in the horoscope of winners of elections, in particular if it's elevated and also configured with one's natal Mars, as it is here, with Mr. Biden's natal Mars by sesquiquadrate, applying only a half degree from exact. Furthermore, this chart directed at the PSSR rate to election night directs the western horizon to transiting Neptune, which is like being captured or bagged. President Biden's lunar return that covers the election is dismal. It begins October 17, 2024. It features transiting Pluto dead angular at the MC, which can be a good thing if Jupiter is also in play with the MC, since Pluto makes extreme whatever it touches. But by itself, Pluto at the MC in a solar or lunar return is symbolic of retirement, being fired, unemployed, on sabbatical or some kind of leave of absence to study abroad, or out of commission, recovering from illness or injury. One could also be isolated, marooned, or out of position. Transiting Mars approaching the IC of this lunar return and subsequent opposition to Pluto is not a good augury for a win. The demi-lunar return, which is the return of the moon to the opposition of its natal place, further homes in on a specific period. Mr. Biden's demi-lunar return that begins on October 31, 2024 is just as bad as the lunar return of October 17th. In this chart, Pluto is again elevated, although not angular, but now near the zenith. Mars is in the 4th house, applying to the nadir. Together, this pair near the zenith and nadir is like being stunned by a well-landed blow. On Election Day, November 5, 2024, the transiting sun will conjoin Mr. Biden's natal Mars exactly. This is not something one wants to see without simultaneous help from transiting Jupiter, especially with transiting Mars applying to the square of Biden's natal moon. In both the president's lunar and demi-lunar returns preceding the election, the Venus-Jupiter opposition is remote from the horizon of both those charts, and the directed horizon of those two charts does not reach Jupiter and Venus together on time, Jupiter not at all, and Venus sets too early in the October 17th lunar on October 27th. In respect of all these things, I predict with great regret that Mr. Biden will lose to Mr. Trump, who will eke out an electoral win in the 2024 U.S. presidential election due to 5 main causes. President Biden's health fails him at the worst moment, which shakes the confidence of millions, especially after the troubles experienced by John Fetterman, senator for Pennsylvania in 2022 and 2023. In the inevitable free-for-all that would follow, voters find it difficult to coalesce around another candidate, which plays into Trump's hand. At least one third-party candidate will take millions of votes from the Democrats. One may recall that Bill Clinton won in 1992 because Ross Perot won 19% of the vote, which effectively torpedoed George Herbert Walker Bush's bid for a second term. Woodrow Wilson won in 1912 because Teddy Roosevelt ran as a third-party candidate, which wrecked William Howard Taft's run for a second term. The currently high-flying American stock market will suffer serious losses in 2024. Behind-the-scenes chicanery by the Republicans, especially by Republican-controlled state legislatures, will negate some votes. Electronic misinformation and disinformation assistance from Vladimir Putin will doubtless sway some voters. Putin desperately wants Trump to win to turn off the spigot to Ukraine. Now the issue turns to the inauguration on January 20th, 2025. After the election, Trump will doubtless think he is home free, but problems begin to appear immediately. I think Trump runs into trouble due to physical problems that become worse, which he cannot conceal indefinitely. These develop later in November and especially in December. His win will probably be contested not so much on grounds that he cheated, but rather on the legality of someone assuming the presidency who is under indictment. The Supreme Court will, in my opinion, brush this aside, as well as Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that should clearly disallow his win because he tried to overthrow the government in 2021. It should not be forgotten that a less conservative court stopped the recount of votes in Florida in 2000 that would probably have made Al Gore president. No action to disqualify or delay Trump should be expected from this court because impartiality is a distant memory among this conservative majority. The late fall will probably be characterized by deadly conflict between MAGA supporters and the rest of the country that doesn't see things their way. This is clearly borne out in the demisolar return of Washington's first inauguration that begins on Election Day, November 5th, 2024. This chart features transiting Mars near the IC, where it will station on December 6th, conjoined to the natal Uranus of Washington's first inauguration, and mundane square the demisolar Uranus on the ascendant of this chart. A Uranus-Mars-Uranus sandwich on angles is nothing less than explosive. I think this will be worst in November and December of 2024. It should be borne in mind that not only is transiting Pluto conjoined to the US Pluto throughout 2024, and at the MC of the 2024 solar return for the US, but both Plutos will oppose the US Mercury, which is like a boomerang onto our independence and civil freedoms, which will be instantly compromised by a Trump victory. Furthermore, transiting Neptune will be simultaneously opposite the US natal Neptune throughout 2024, and both Neptunes will be square the US natal Mars. These very rare and extreme transits point to a wild free-for-all that entails bloodshed, the imposition of martial law, and the temporary suspension of constitutional freedoms. In short, I believe that the 2024-25 period will be the most serious governmental crisis since the Civil War. The final chart, the chart for the 2025 inauguration, is frightfully bad, at least at the beginning of the term. It symbolizes what the Trump administration will be about. The Sun conjoined to Pluto less than a degree from exact, and both of them semi-square Saturn, also less than a degree from exact, is a template for autocracy. That is, this particular three-way combination both severely limits and concentrates power. The Moon is not only in conjunct Saturn by less than 2¼ degrees. The Moon is mundane square the Sun by 1 minute 27 seconds, which is less than a ½ degree. And she's also mundane square Pluto by 6 minutes 53 seconds, which is less than 1¾ degrees. Therefore, limits and centralized control imposed on the general public will be tighter than anyone suspects because the Moon's aspects repeat and therefore underscore the Sun's aspects. Mars at the IC suggests that control will be enforced by the military, perhaps tenuously, but certainly that is the key to his entire plan. I think orders will be issued that describe what people can do, when, and to what degree, and by what authority they can do it. One can see that from Mercury square the Moon almost exactly, in particular because this 2025 inauguration Moon is conjoined to the U.S. natal Saturn at 23 Virgo 11 minutes. That three-way symbolism of Moon, Mercury plus U.S. natal Saturn signifies limitations on the press, travel, and the free exchange of information. I think the Trump administration will arouse fear and threaten our status as a republic, which is to say the entire structure of representative government. There will surely be strong grassroots opposition to his attempt to completely hijack the American government in April 2025, when transiting Mars reaches the IC of this chart and then crosses into the 4th house. Transiting Mars will oppose the Sun-Pluto conjunction and arrive at the sesquiquadrate to the 2025 inauguration Saturn, all in short order by the end of April. When transiting Mars reaches the nadir of this chart on May 18, 2025, organized reaction to a tyrant who misjudged the American people will, in my opinion, confront the more violent and aggressive members of the far right. It should not be overlooked that the moon in this 2025 inauguration is square Mars, almost 6 degrees out, actually 5 degrees 52 minutes, but their Mundo square is 14 minutes and 2 seconds of time from exact, which is 3.5 degrees. That symbolizes fighting because Mars is the ruler of the 1st and the 8th. I think there will be hell to pay during this reckoning by those who were willing to sell out our country to a tyrant. Once more, and finally, I think Trump's health, like Biden's, may well fail him, although I think he stabilizes in the last third of January and throughout February, although his vice president may handle a good deal of the day-to-day duties of the presidency during the remainder of the winter. The latest part of the winter, however, from mid-March through April 2025 and into early May, are intensely challenging to him physically. These things should not make people feel depressed or hopeless. The pendulum begins to swing back soon after the election as people wake up to what a Trump administration will mean. His physical condition will hasten that resolution. Here are a few resources for anyone who would like to learn more about the topics I've covered here. The book on the left, An Introduction to Western Sidereal Astrology, was my first book, now in its 3rd edition. This book includes the basics of Western sidereal astrology. The centerpiece of the book is the delineation of the 45 planet combinations, which can be used by both sidereal and tropical astrologers. If you would like to know more about in mundo aspects, I have a free lecture on this topic on my website. In mundo aspects can be used by both tropical and sidereal astrologers. As I say in the video, when we ignore in mundo aspects, we ignore half the chart. The next resource is my interpretation course on Western sidereal astrology. This course is for intermediate and advanced students of astrology. This is the only course I know of that shows students how to incorporate in mundo aspects into their interpretations. The charts use Western sidereal longitude, but the course is also suitable for tropical astrologers since the same rules of interpretation apply to both schools. The last resource is my book, Primary Directions in the Horoscope of the United States. This is a good resource for anyone who wants to know more about the 12:16 p.m. time that I use and how this time was confirmed by primary directions. It also covers the various charts used for the U.S., including a complete analysis of the Sibley chart. This concludes my talk, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to be informed when new lectures are available, please sign up for our mailing list on my website. On the website, you'll find articles, additional lectures, and webinars on a variety of astrological topics.